Everyone, welcome. I'm really excited today to have another discussion with my good friend, Dr. Massimo Fontana, and also Dr. Edward Fernandes, who we'll be interviewing today. We're going to talk about a topic that is usually not spoken of and kept quiet in most cultures, which is polyamory and the ranges between monogamy, open marriages, polyamory, and all of those things, and how that can impact pretty much everything in your relationship. So I'm really, really pleased to have my associates here, and I think we're going to have a really interesting discussion. And I hope if anybody has any questions, please you can post them in the chat. And also at the end, if you have any questions, we'll be happy to take them via you asking us personally. With that, we do ask that everybody please mute their mics to not interfere, but otherwise, that's the main thing we'll be talking about. The reason that I thought this was important to mention, and also for the high community, is my wife Wendy and I have, over the past, I guess, 13 years, encountered a lot of people. We're not therapists. We came from this from a totally different angle. But we found that people tend to have repeating challenges in their relationship. The first one is misunderstanding what sex is. I won't go into the details there, but that's major misunderstanding. The second is misunderstanding what love means to each person, and which is yet another big deal. The third is sexual orientation, that if one partner is homosexual or bisexual and may not even realize it or be comfortable with acknowledging that can cause challenges in the relationship. And the final is where they are as far as being, in theory, totally monogamous versus being, which is staying with one partner for your life, or being totally polyamorous, which is literally loving multiple partners at the same time, and then the entire spectrum in between. And these topics aren't usually talked about, but if you can get on the same page about it, it really makes life easier in your relationship. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm really delighted to have everybody here. Again, I'm Steve McGough. I've worked in this field for about 13 years. I have a doctorate in human sexuality and a BS in biochemistry, and work in neuroscience. And long story for that. Dr. Fontana or Massimo and Dr. Fernandes, if you'd like to, or Eddie, if you'd like to introduce yourselves, please do. And your background, you're fantastic.
I'm Dr. Massimo Fontana. I'm a sexologist. Amongst that and other degrees and diplomas and everything like that, I really focus on sexology as my primary clinical practice. I've been practicing for something like 20 years already, originally from South Africa, then London, now in Spain. And yeah, it's been an interesting journey for me.
Well, my name is Edward Fernandes. I have a doctoral degree in social psychology and sexology, and a master's degree in school psychology, which are basically connected. And I've been doing research on swinging, open marriages, probably for the last 35 years or so. And I have written much on the subject. I've published much on the subject, and there's something that I find absolutely fascinating. Very
wonderful. So basically, this is a topic that we all know a little bit about, and hopefully we can share what we've learned, especially Dr. Fernandes here with his experience in that, to the people watching. One thing I wanted to emphasize is these are just our perspectives. And one challenge that I've found repeatedly in sexology and other areas is that the person presenting, particularly if they're a sexologist in certain countries in the United States and other areas, they tend to present it as the only way. And I want to emphasize these are our viewpoints. These experiences are what we've had, but everybody's unique. We also are not trying to tell you what to think. What we're trying to do is stimulate you to think and to expand, your experience in life. So that's basically us. I guess the next thing to go into, Massimo, if you want to talk about what we're going to explore here today, is the questions.
So, as a starting point, what are the differences between monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, open relationships, and polyamory? Another one is, how common are non-traditional types of relationships? How are they different? What common things do we see when relationships break up that often are due to partners having differences? What do you do if your partner feels like they are polyamorous or you want to step into the polyamorous space? Also, how do couples navigate this very complicated space? And that's where I think, Eddie, you're going to be amazingly helpful for a lot of the people that are listening to us.
I think one of the things that I'd like to bring out is something that Steve mentioned, which is, what is sex? What is love? What is the relationship between the two of them? And I think that is extremely important to explore that, because you can have great sex without love. You can have great love without great sex. And you can have a combination of both somewhere down the line. To quote a friend of mine that said, they would say, I've had some of my best sex on one night stands, and I've had the best love ever with someone that I didn't enjoy sex with. So those are the two extremes that you can look at in terms of the relationship between loves and sex. However, in our Western culture, and as Steve mentioned, we tend to sort of marry the two of them, and as though they're inseparable. So if you have great love, you must have great sex. If you have great sex, you must have great love. And when those things aren't present, this is when problems come in.
That's absolutely. And what I've seen is most couples assume the other couple's on the same page, which is not usually the case, unfortunately. But well, that's Dr. Fernandes. Do you have any particular? You have an amazing history. I didn't read off your whole CV and everything, but it's astonishing what you've achieved in your life. Do you have any particular experiences you'd like to share that are notable that people might find interesting?
I'm not so sure that these are great experiences I've had. I mean, my main motivation is curiosity. I'm curious about things I don't understand. Therefore, I try to find out about them. And this is how I got involved in sort of researching swinging per se. And my background in terms of the interest in swinging stems from a Geraldo Rivera show in the mid-'80s, in which Geraldo proclaimed to the world that swinging was dead because Plato's retreat in New York City had closed due to AIDS. And so, being curious, I says, really? Is that what's going on? And went from there. Now, one of the experience I had, perhaps the very first couple I interviewed for my research would have been probably, I'd say 86, 87, was a couple from Buffalo, New York, never forget, I won't mention names, but he looked very much like the Fonz. If you guys remember Happy Days and the Fonz, that's exactly what this guy looked like. And he sounded like the Fonz. And she looked like Mrs. Cunningham, kind of sort of demure, conservative looking and whatever. And the experience of the story basically goes as this. He was always interested in watching his wife have sex with other men. That was his big kink, his big turn on. He was married once, and his first wife told him, forget it, we're not going to do it, it'll never happen. Now, this is his second wife. He pursued her for years with this idea, I really like to see this. This is a kink, this is a turn on for me. And he kept talking about a club in Toronto, the swingers club in Toronto, that he wanted to visit. And she kept putting him off. And one day, as she put it, I've had enough of his complaining and his whining, and I decided, okay, let's go to Toronto. So they went to Toronto to one of the swingers clubs, and they were told that they should just watch interactions. There's no sex involved in the clubs in those days, but don't accept invitations to parties. Don't go anywhere until you're sort of comfortable with this. And actually, what happened is that very first night, he accepted an invitation to a party. they went to a hotel party, and as she puts it, I went in and I looked around and whatever, had a couple of drinks, and before I knew, I was having sex with 3 or 4 guys and loving it. And he went off the roof. He was so jealous that he pulled me by the arm, pushed me out of it, yelled and screamed, made a scene. And she says, I told him, never again, I'll never do this again. The following Sunday, he approached her and said, there's a boat party that somebody invited us to. Would you like to go? And the conclusion, basically, they've been swingers for over 30 years, and she liked it. When in the beginning, she actually was very reluctant to even consider engaging in anything that she considered dirty sex. And maybe that was the key for them. Dirty sex worked for them and improved their satisfaction within the marriage itself.
Do you remember the transition for her into that space of accepting that new lifestyle?
As now, I can only go by what she said.
Yep.
That she never realized that sex could be that good, engaging with different people. She never thought about it. It was something that was foreign to us because she bought into the paradigm that you are monogamous for life, and if you sort of transgress, if you cross that line, that somehow the marriage is going to fall apart, and it didn't. So that always stayed with me because I thought it was really, really interesting.
You know, one thing, we'll have to have a whole new talk in the future on this about consent and communication, because I've seen that so many times myself with couples when Wendy and I would go to lifestyle related resorts or events to talk or speak. And frequently the women will act the way you're describing, that they will be conservative, but then they change. And I've always wondered how you can maintain the boundaries of consent and honoring your partner's requests, but at the same time expressing your own. Because what's really interesting, I've seen several times, is women will act very conservative as far as their roles, act in traditional, and then if they go to a male strip show and it's only women in there, they act worse than I've seen things at Marine bases with males. And it seems like there has to be a group consensus of behavior. And but again, we'll have to have a whole separate talk on that, because that's a very important topic, because it's essential to honor your partner's requests. But at the same time, if you have, it's important to be who you are. And if you're wanting something else, it's good to be honest about it. But Massimo, let's readdress that later if we have time. But Massimo, did you have a question for Dr. Fernandes?
To be honest, it was really along the lines of the jealousy side, because you mentioned that his immediate reaction was, to be very jealous of what was going on there. And I think that's often something that I see in couples that are opening themselves up to this different lifestyle. And I guess maybe the question is, how do you help, be it man or woman, doesn't have to be gender specific, but helping them step into that space and confront that jealousy, that ability to accept what's actually going on, because it's a necessity for the relationship.
I think to a great extent, people develop a sense of jealousy because they feel neglected. They feel as though that if their partner is enjoying somebody else, they will never be able to enjoy themselves again, ever. So the sense of jealousy tends to be a sort of retaliation towards the possibility that the partner may go somewhere else or find somebody more attractive or sexually more enjoyable and whatnot. And so there's a certain sense of neglect that comes into that. It's, for instance, if my partner is having sex with somebody and he or she is enjoying themselves, how does that then, are they comparing what they're experiencing with the experience they have with me? So it becomes kind of a me focus, and hence the sense of jealousy comes about it. Obviously, in terms of evolutionary psychology, the idea is jealousy is meant to protect paternity, but I don't think that's involved in those particular situations. So it is important, I guess, as Steve said, that you understand, or there's an understanding within the couple itself of the things that are allowable or the things that are not. One of the things I kept coming across dealing with swingers, they would talk about the rules. They would always say, ask about the rules. Now, the rules are perimeters that are arrived at through conversation in terms of what the partners are allowed to do or are not allowed to do. I think when we're dealing with swinging per se, or open marriages as such, the consent is already assumed, because otherwise, if there's no consent, then these things would not happen anyhow. It's not something that is verbally expressed at the time. But the rules then are negotiated and negotiable as such. So, for instance, I've come across people call it the lifestyle, if you like, that would say, no kissing. You can do anything you want, but no kissing. And I would ask, why is kissing such an important element for you that your partner cannot kiss somebody? And they would say, because kissing involves emotion. And therefore, as long as there is no emotion, as long as the sex is recreational, everything is cool. If you bring some kind of emotionality into this context, then the relationship is threatened. For as much as this may be sort of an asinine concept, that's exactly what they talked about. So the rules were extremely important. And I think that, well, in any situation, in terms of a partnership, rules are really, really important, especially they're negotiated, they are explored, and there's a consensus at the end.
Something that I bring into the couple is, it's called an RDBSMA conversation, and this really comes from more sort of tantric spaces. So when you're looking at RDBSM, and I guess this really works when you've just met someone for the first time in that kind of space. What's your relationship status? What's your boundaries? What's your desire? What's your sexual status? What's the meaning that you're placing on this interaction? And then also, what's the aftercare? But that's also a concept that you can bring into the relationship as it stands if you're already in a relationship for a long period of time. And I like playing within the realm of, where are the boundaries? What's the desire? And I think if people can have that kind of conversation just on those two concepts, a lot comes out for them.
I totally agree. I completely agree with you. And I think also, what we were talking about earlier about how people define love. If a relationship is defined as a monogamous, romantic, and sexual activity, and that means love, then kissing in a case might symbolize the romantic connection, and that might be a threat to somebody. Or again, it depends how you expand it. English is very challenging for love and many other words, because a lot of it's defined by context. Love for self, love for partner, romantic love, playful love, love for children, love for friends, love for God, spiritual love for connection. And Sanskrit, and I'm going to brutalize the pronunciation, but the word mudita, if I'm pronouncing it right, which means, if I understand right, there are 92 separate distinct words for different experiences of love. And mudita, as I understand, is the love you feel for someone else, where you get enjoyment seeing them succeeding, seeing them growing, seeing them having pleasure, seeing them somehow benefiting. And historically, it's presented in the context of, you have a child and you're so happy when they do well at something they've been wanting to do, or they achieve a goal. But in a couples relationship, I've talked to a lot of people that are in the lifestyle, and they'll say they actually get pleasure seeing the other partner get pleasure. So their connection and their relationship is not defined by the traditional parameters. It's defined by a faith that the other partner will be around as a life partner, and they're both exploring different physical avenues and possibly emotional avenues if they're more polyamorous. and they actually get pleasure seeing the other partner pleasured. Now cuckold relationships, and I'm not pronouncing that right either, please correct me. But I personally believe there's a little bit of a genetic influence in that in men, that some men desire their partner to. That's a whole nother conversation. But I just wanted to interject that as far as where the confusion can lie, because we're brought up to be monogamous in most Western cultures. But then the question is, before we had our established farming and land boundaries, were we different? We don't have a lot of writing but a lot of people speculate that, but we don't know. And I say it's what's right for each person. But that's, I think you were going to ask Dr. Fernandes about monogamy and the language and everything. I'm derailing us, so I was.
What I'd love to know is from your perspective, what you see monogamy, consensual non-monogamy, and open relationships and polyamory being. And maybe you could give the audience a little bit of a clearer understanding of what those concepts mean.
Well, monogamy overall is sort of an established and accepted pattern of couple sexual and romantic behavior, meaning that it is expected within Western societies that once you get married to someone, that you are going to be, quote unquote, faithful to that person in terms of your sexual relationships. So sex is only between the two of you. Nobody else is invited in, nobody else is accepted in. And if one of the partners deviates, we call it cheating, which is kind of a term that is very acrimonious as such, which denotes somebody's character as being terrible because they cheated. So that's basically what a monogamy is in terms of Western concepts per se. However, I want to add something to that this concept of monogamy is fine with a lot of people. They're fine. They don't want to deviate from it. They don't understand why anybody would go out of it. Allows them to develop sort of a sexual expertise with the other person. They learn to know what works for them overall, and they're quite happy with it. So the idea that although we may not necessarily be monogamous as a species, which I don't think we are, for some people it's just fine. And for those individuals, don't touch something isn't broken, don't fix it. Just leave it alone, let it go, let it play. For a lot of other people, it doesn't work. There's research that shows, for instance, that sexual satisfaction starts to wane after the first year of marriage, meaning that eventually becomes monotonous, becomes routine, becomes bland, becomes, as some people describe it, boring. That you are with the same person over and over and over again, and the sense of stimulation or even passion is gone out of it. So you do it mechanically. As someone once said, we know Saturday night, we just get in bed, she turns around, we have sex, 2 minutes later, it's done and over with, and we go to sleep. And that's the routine every Saturday night. So that's monogamy overall. Now, consensual non-monogamy, what we call nowadays, which includes swinging, includes open marriages per se, it's much more of a complicated process because the individuals engage in sexual activity with others by mutual consent. This is something that is understood. However, in swinging, the most important part of the process is the couple. The couple's dynamics and the couple's relationship is paramount. So both individuals try to sort of safeguard that. So people go and enjoy sex with somebody else. They call it play sex or playful sexuality, if you like. But they always retreat back to the couple as the sort of the building block of the relationship. So the relationship isn't threatened. Now, people can say, well, good luck with that, because there's always kinds of things that get in the way. But really, the couple works to maximize the relationship per se. Steve was talking about the fact that people may enjoy or get satisfaction from seeing their partner get enjoyment. There are couples that would only play with other couples or other people within the same bed or in the same bedroom because there's the visual component of it. I'm watching my wife being pleased by someone and enjoying herself, or I watch my husband being pleased by somebody and enjoying themselves. And I partake in that satisfaction because I have contributed towards it. And this is quite often what people tend to sort of look at. There are other couples, for instance, that will not have sex in the presence of their partner. They'll go to separate bedrooms, as separate contexts, for instances, because they don't necessarily want to be, as was put to me, they don't want to be pressured by it. I know one wife that I interviewed said to me, I do things with other men when my husband is not present that I wouldn't do when he was present because I don't want them to feel bad about it. And it could be different modalities, including types of oral sex or anal sex or combination thereof, or for instance, women that enjoy having 2 or 3 guys at the same time and whatnot, and they don't want to put pressure on their partner by having sex in front of them. So there's all kinds of different modalities that go on. But in terms of swinging, as I say, consensual relationship, the most important part is the couple. The couple is still paramount. Now, open relationships, the way we sort of define it nowadays, tend to be much more fluid as it is, but whereby partners can engage in sex with other people. They don't necessarily need the quote unquote on the spot consent of the other partner because it's already assumed. They've already talked about it. They can go and have fun. They can even, for instance, at times develop particular romantic relationships, which is okay, which is admissible within the couple context per se. And then polyamory, which is a whole different ballgame. Polyamory involves romantic and sexual relationships with 2 individuals or more. And the combinations thereof are as different as you have different sexualities per se. Quite often in polyamory relationships, you may have one of the partners being bisexual, having a partner from each gender or a combination thereof. Now, there are more problems with these type of relationships because it's hard enough to deal being in a relationship with one other individual. If you bring more people into the mix, that can sort of cause some more problems, I think. That's the word I like to use overall. And that's basically it. There's a combination there of many different modalities within these 3 basic concepts per se.
Do you find that when you were interviewing your participants that each had a very different idea of what freedom meant for them as well?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I taking that into everyday life, everybody's concept of freedom is very different. And this is what I try to emphasize, the fact that we as a species, humans, tend to be quite different from each other. And if we are going to understand what we're about, and Steve mentioned the fact that you can look at hunter-gatherer societies, which they still exist today. And their approach to relationships and sex and love is quite different than people that tend to be in what traditional communities like ours, for instance.
Well, that's fascinating, and it well, again, I could ask a lot of questions, but to get on the main point, for people that are watching this, trying to understand themselves and if they're in hopefully understand themselves before they're in a relationship and learn to communicate what they want. But then when they're in a relationship, be open in their communication, each other's needs, and also as they might evolve and change. But how common, and again, this is a question that can't truly be answered, but how common are these different types of relationships in the distribution in society, at least based on the surveys that have been done?
Well, it's extremely difficult to even come up with prevalence in terms of how common are these things within a particular community per se. And the reason being that people tend to keep these things secret. Usually it's not on the census. The census does not ask you, are you in an open relationship? They wouldn't even think about asking this. So we can only ascertain participation based on the research that exists. And again, these tend to be kind of subjective numbers that we come up with. But the numbers that are often batted around is anywhere between 12% to 22% of the population falls within the consensual non-monogamy per se. There may be more today. I really couldn't tell you. I can only go by the numbers we have. There hasn't been that much research in this area, not as much as it should be for that matter. And so that becomes extremely difficult. For instance, the research that I do, I usually use surveys within specific populations of interest, swingers, and I follow that up with person-to-person interviews, just to sort of try to maximize the information that I get from the surveys. Because believe it or not, people lie in surveys. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that, but people tend to do that. So you're trying to sort of verify information. And my sample sizes tend to be rather large in terms of the type of research that I do. The smaller sample sizes I get is from 3,000 to 5,000, which tends to be quite significant in terms of that kind of research. And so I can only say that, is it prevalent? Yes. Do we see more and more? Absolutely. Do people know what they're getting into? Probably not, because there isn't any formal education in this type of relationships. You don't take courses in school, for instance, that teach you about consensual non-monogamy, unless you take my courses, in which I always talked about it. But the point being that most people go into it because they are driven towards it. It's sort of an opportunity that comes up, and quite often people don't talk amongst themselves within the couple what the consequences may be overall. So that's basically all I can tell you.
Well, that's good to know. Go ahead, Massimo. Sorry.
No, I was going to ask, would you be able to point out some of the consequences that you've seen when someone quite naively steps into that space? So in other words, what should they be expecting if they are going to go on an individual level, but then equally within the couple into that space?
You know, it's interesting that having interviewed swingers for over 30 years, there are particular memes, I guess you could call it, that I think are really telling. For instance, if you're looking at swinging to solve problems in your relationship, swinging is probably the quickest way to end your relationship. Number one. Also saying another meme it's common among swingers is the fact that the couple that plays together stays together. So if somebody said to me, this is a team sport, you play together. Because if you don't agree on the rules of the game, and we talked about rules already, I says, if you don't agree on the rules of the game, well, the game is going to go sour. Definitely. So these are some of the consequences that people that go into it without exploring it before are probably going to come across.
Yeah, I was wondering, how often do you see couples that when they start that process of swinging or exploring things, that one partner develops what I would call a crush? Often when we've talked at events, I warn couples about how they might form a romantic crush or that type of, especially if we taught a practice that's similar to Tantra, where you look in somebody's eyes, and if the one partner's pupils dilate, that other person tends to get a crush on them. And it's a fading thing. But how often does that happen? And what advice do you give to people to try to navigate past that to maintain their relationship?
Well, that's kind of a question that really has no answer, because it's really difficult to predict if you are going to develop a romantic attraction towards somebody. It's really, really, really difficult. Can you prevent that from happening? Probably not. Can you anticipate that happening? Yes, you can. How do you safeguard the relationship against that? You can't, because you don't know. There are, for instance, couples within the swinging lifestyle or even open relationships that eventually will meet somebody else along the way, and they form a strong enough relationship with that person to leave the present relationship as it is. So it's really, really, really hard, really very, very difficult to even try to tell someone that that's not going to happen. I always, when people ask me that question, I says, well, it may happen. You can't prevent it from happening. What do you do about it? Not much. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
no, that kind of does. What I've seen is the crush type of feeling is usually something that's transitory, and even with like my wife Wendy, we've been together dating 24 years now, but living, married 22. The crushes and the romantic feelings are like seasons; they come and they go, but then the deeper love feelings for us are constant, and then the utility functions are there, and the friendships there. But it seems, I guess I also should say, my mentor, Dr. McLavena, would say, only speak from the context of what you personally experienced. And I haven't experienced being pulled to somebody else. So to me, it's transitory, but it might be a permanent thing for someone else. I guess to expand on that, as far as, roughly more than half of all relationships end or fail in the United States. The statistics are debatable. But how much of relationship failures are due, do you think, to misunderstandings about the person's orientation as far as monogamy versus open or polyamorous relationships?
Well, let me actually address something that you just talked about. What's the difference between lust and love? You remember high school? How many people did you develop crushes on?
Every
Did they
day.
change? So that part, it's almost self-explanatory. In terms of developing love, and you talked about companionship, which is an extremely important component of love. The idea that you feel somebody shares something with you, they're in the journey with you, they're your voyage companions as such. That's a whole different ballgame. And this is something that, for instance, in terms of the experience I've had in terms of swinging and open relationships, people will say, "Oh yeah, I can develop a crush on somebody, I can develop a crush on another one, but after a few months, that's gone. I sort of move on to somebody else." They may remain friends, for that matter. A lot of you find, specifically within swinging, a lot of friendships tend to be lifelong, even if they don't play with them anymore, but there's something that connects them somewhere along the line. So that in itself is important. Not sure if it answers your question, but
No, that does. Thank you I appreciate that.
I think it's amazing how you explain that, because I have a concept in my mind that the person that you choose in, let's say, for instance, a monogamous relationship, really represents 80% for me, and I can speak for myself. That 20% is really where, if it's in the space of polyamory or open relationship, if I can have that 20% experience with this other person and live it through, and having the support of my partner to feel free in that space, it has a timeline, and it'll eventually reach that point where it comes to an end and you transition back into your relationship again. That's what I see happening very often.
Well, you addressed the concept of desire. What is desire, or sexual desire? What is it? You look at somebody and you go, I think I would. It's interesting, because I say that to my wife all the time, or she'll say to me, would you? And I'm going, possibly. And so it's an agreement almost that exists. It's part of the relationship that you understand that there's that connection, that you are honest enough with your partner that you can share that, because it's a sharing process. Now, people tend to say that men are much more sexual than women in terms of desire, but I tend to disagree with that. The experience is that women tend to be far more sexual than men are. And also that men tend to be, I call it contextually and temporary horny. You see something now. Yes, I would like to. Would you? Possibly. Would you follow up on it? Maybe. Where women tend to be much more judicious about it. They tend to be much more cerebral about it, much more so than men are, per se. Just look at something really simple, that was never explained. I could never understand. Why is it the women can have multiple orgasms, but a guy usually has one, maybe two, depending on the time? And so if women are supposed to, or are able to have multiple orgasms, who are they supposed to have the multiple orgasms with if a guy can only have one? Is it masturbation, a few dildos along the way, some vibrators? What is this? So this is why I keep looking at the fact that women tend to be far more sexual and express sexuality in a much wider variety than men can.
That's such a great observation.
I agree. It's I think well, one thing I've paid a lot of attention to for over 10 years is the wiring, the neurology, and women, at least if the work Barry Korinsarek and Beverly Whipple at Rutgers is correct, and I believe it is, women, the distal branch of their vagus nerve, which is entirely separate from the spine, innervates their uterus and their cervix, and vaginal and cervical orgasms are induced via that route, which is entirely independent of like the pudendal nerve and the pelvic and hypogastric nerve and pudendal nerve that's in the clitoris. And there's a lot of speculation that that's training drills for giving birth. It's a much more primitive system, but women have that active, whereas men, unless it's prostate stimulation, there may be something going on there that hasn't been researched, don't. Maybe they just have better wiring, or they have different wiring from, better is not the right word, different wiring from men for that. Now, with certain practices of semen retention, men can learn to, in theory, be multi-orgasmic, but I tried that for 25 years and gave up on enlightenment with Taoist stuff. And, you can have retrograde ejaculation where you intervene the contractory reflex, but that's not the same thing as what women experience based on my observation. But I'm getting us on a rabbit trail here again. I'll get back to my notes to make sure. Massimo, were you curious about, as far as questions for Eddie about relationships? Or
Eddie, there was one question. It's you were talking about honesty, and what I find a lot of the time when I work with couples is that one of the things that, even though people have been together for a very long time, they never speak about expectations. And their perception or idea of honesty is very, very different or warped. And, from your experience working with so many swingers and couples, where did you see the sort of the differentiation in terms of how they were communicating, and let's say just a bog standard person from the street?
I'm going to give you a general answer. And again, I want to emphasize this is a general answer. Couples that have been swinging for a long time are far more honest with each other in terms of their desires and in terms of their expectations. There was a couple that said this to me, and I think it had an impact. If I can watch my wife having sex with another man, there's nothing we can't discuss. And that goes right back to everything that deals with the relationship, from finances to whatever. However, there's always a caveat. There's always a caveat when it comes to us humans. We're a little weird. And there is the fact that there are certain things that we think about that we would never reveal to anybody, including our partners. I call them, there's a little movies that go on in our heads that somebody is directing, and it's telling us things that we don't communicate with other people. Now, so long as these particular inner voices, as I call them, as long as they don't affect the relationship in any way, shape, or form, it's okay to keep your little secrets. People have secrets that they don't share. And that's okay, as long as it doesn't impact the relationship overall. The problem comes in specifically with monogamous couples, that you start to think about things and you don't communicate it. You could say that you actually lie about those to your partners because you really don't want them to find out what's going on in your head. From that perspective, we're all in the closet, all of us, because there's things we think about that we'll never bring out of the closet. I would say that swinging couples overall, and remember, I'm sort of generalizing here, overall tend to have better relationships in terms of communications than anybody else because of those particular preventive measures we take not to allow our partner to know what's going on in our heads, per se. Does that answer your question?
It does, and I think it lends really nicely to sort of concepts of, I'm assuming here, but they probably have a lessened fear of loss, that the partner is potentially going to abandon them as well. And yeah, I guess truth is really the thing that drives the relationship. That's amazing.
Because I think in terms of relationships, period, there is nothing worse than somebody feeling neglected and fearing that somehow the relationship is only one-sided, which quite often people do, and that they have no control. People like to use the word agency over the relationship. When we feel that we are actually partners with someone, it works great. I mean, I use the analogy, if you don't mind me saying so, of sports. In a team sport, there is not just one individual, there's the team. If the team works well together, the team is going to win, okay? And music, since I'm a musician, in music, the members of the band, the group, the orchestra, whatever you like, have to play in concert, and each one has a role to play, which is to support the other musicians. Same thing in a relationship. We have to support each other. If we don't, you may as well just pack it in because it's not going anywhere.
A concept that I use very often with couples and individuals is that if my partner is facilitating my freedom and I'm facilitating her freedom, you've pretty much got a very well balanced relationship there. But I think that lends nicely to what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, Steve Porges or Dr. Porges at UNC, which I'm a big fan of, even though his stuff's controversial with polyvagal theory, he often says the highest priority for a relationship is for each partner to do their best to make sure the other partner feels safe, whatever that means. How, and I guess that transitions into another question, which is probably something that would be important for our friends watching and listening. How would a couple where one partner wants to be more adventurous and they don't know what the other partner wants, how would they go about engaging in a conversation and the discussion to do that in a way that's reasonably safe? I guess would be the right thing, because these are bombshell topics. I mean, these are we're walking on eggshells here.
I think Massimo had already sort of touched on that somewhere along the line, the idea of sharing fantasies. How do you share fantasies? I think I mentioned to you, Steve, that when I had a couples therapy practice, what I would do is I would get each partner to write their fantasies out, and then I would have them exchange the writings. So you write the fantasies out on your own. The other person's not present, and then you exchange. You let the other person read your fantasies. And every once in a while, I'd come across people that would say, I never knew you liked that. I really like that too, but I was afraid to even ask or suggest it. So quite often we assume that the other person is not going to like something we like, which is really a dumb way of looking at things, because why not share it? Well, I like to do this. I never thought about it. It doesn't appeal to me. Okay, so that's off the table, right? Because if one partner does not agree to what you want to try, it's not going to happen. Because if you force it, if you force somebody into something, then this is very, very dangerous territory, because it's going to impact all kinds of things within the relationship itself. So the sharing is exactly that, sharing. There's situations where somebody will go, I never thought of that, but yeah, willing to give it a shot. And so then you negotiate how you go about trying it together. Yes, if you come to someone that you've never really approached before and say, you know what, I like other women, or I like other men, I'd like to have sex with them. And the other person goes, what? You never said that to me. That's not going to happen. unless you really negotiate. In order to negotiate this, you got to be a really good politician, because it takes politics to be able to negotiate it. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere.
What would you advise? Well, for instance, I have a friend I've known for a long time that has had challenges with relationships, and they basically told me once that they felt they were in love with 3 people, and but the person their partner was clearly about as monogamous as, and threatened by anybody, and jealous. So how would they? And again, I always look for broad strokes, and everything is unique from case to case. But for people in that situation, do you have any suggestions other than just talking honestly and bringing up fantasies, or is it that they're not compatible with the other person?
If somebody said that to me, the very first question I would say, how do you know you're in love with them? What is it? What does it mean? Are you in lust with them, or are you in love with them? I think, and again, goes back to the question, this kind of the perennial question, what is love? Love is a process that does not happen overnight. When people say, I love you, or I'm in love with you, are these two things the same, or are they different? Because they can be different. Because most often when we say, I'm in love with you, most often lust is a very strong component of that. When somebody says, I love you, that is much more encompassing, and it entitles all kinds of different things. I mean, the process of being in love and loving someone are different. And you find that quite often, if I may offer this example, in older couples. They love each other. They support each other. They are willing to take care of each other. The old idea of in health and sickness. Well, when you get older, the chances are you could be sick. Somebody being in love is different from somebody loving somebody. Now, in terms of answering your question, well, if the other person in your relationship is not buying into it, you can't sell it. You're going to have to deal with it at some point. And then you have to decide, is your relationship worth the effort, or is your relationship not worth the effort? And this is the question that you ask. And to that, there are no simple answers, really.
I was given very good advice many years ago, and it was whether you choose to be monogamous, polyamorous, open relationship, or swinging, it's a question of what complexity you want to take on.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah. I've had actually remember a couple of swingers that told me, says, it's like keeping many balls in the air and you better not drop one. Because if you drop one, the rest is going to fall. And it isn't simple. And again, I really hope that I'm putting this across. Human relationships are not simple ever. And when we try to assume that there's a simplicity that we can sort of apply to different contexts, we're in trouble, because nothing is simple. Like I says, I know swinger couples that they're in their 70s now. I actually know a couple that are in their 80s now, still swinging, believe it or not. And they've been in this for a long time. So they have developed the ability to deal with situations as they come across and to deal with the dynamics of the couple, because it always comes down to the dynamics of the couple itself. And pretty much everybody's different. So.
Well, that's fascinating stuff. That what projects are you currently working on, Eddie? What did you like to share with us? I know you got a lot of stuff going.
I was approached by a publisher about 8 years ago, and asked me if I was interested in writing a book on swinging. My dissertation, which was over 400 pages, was published as well. But anyways, and I said, yeah, sure, and completely forgot about it. And about a few weeks ago, the same publisher contacted me and said, well, are you working on that book on swinging? And so I says, well, I would like to write a book about the history of non-monogamy in the 20th and the 21st century. And then going back right down to the early 1900s and look at the bohemian lifestyles and in terms of their sexual lifestyle, and how that sort of morphed into what we now call consensual non-monogamies, and how that's changed over the years, the perceptions and the history of it, because there's a really long history associated with it, which encompasses all kinds of things, including the commercialization of swinging and how that is now permeated in terms of the societies nowadays. What does this have to do with permissiveness? What this has to do with sexual orientation, and how these things sort of interplay together. There's a whole history there. So it's not a simple project, as I'm finding out, and I'm compiling stuff, and there's more and more stuff. So that's basically one of the things I work on. I used to do a lot of workshops and presentations at swingers conventions. I was invited quite often to go different places. I don't necessarily have the desire to travel that much anymore. So that's basically it.
Okay, well, please let us know when your book comes out, because I definitely, Massimo, I know you have to leave before too long. Did you have any questions for Dr. Fernandes?
I have many that I'm probably going to be sending you directly, and it's just an absolute privilege to be in the space with you and learn from you and everything that you've shared. So thank you from my part before I shoot off.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I really like to know more about what you do as well. I think we should have many conversations.
We will. I don't doubt.
Massimo has a fantastic book for couples. It is really outstanding. We'll have to have a separate talk just on it.
Simple one, but it works really nicely.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you for being here, Massimo, and we'll meet again next week. And I can hang around for a few more minutes if anybody has any questions, or for Dr. Fernandes. And I have a few questions for you, Dr. Fernandes, actually. One thing I've seen, Massimo and I talked about this last week about automatic behaviors. Oh, take care, Massimo. Thanks. We talked about automatic behaviors where people, I called it the dark side of being in flow, which ruffled some people's feathers that are, I'm a big fan of that, whatever that state is, I'm a big fan of it too. But people many times when they're in intimate situations, based on my observation, will default to they'll default to other behaviors they don't plan. The most common thing that happens with men that and the reason that we've seen that, for the people that don't know what Wendy and I've been doing, we have a product somewhere in the background there called High that can induce orgasm over clothing for women. And so we've been able to watch orgasm real time. And what's really interesting is for men, what we have to, there are three things you do with the device. You let the woman align it to the right spot. Then ideally her partner holds it. And then if it falls out of place, the woman moves it back into place. But what happens is men get this almost uncontrollable urge to start rocking it and moving it around when the woman starts having vagal breathing, belly breathing. And that doesn't work for the woman. So that's the first thing. The men have that behavior. Women have a behavior that we've seen, and I've seen this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. They suddenly lay still and they don't say anything. They don't move. They don't speak up. Even the most outspoken, confident women suddenly freeze up. In lifestyle environment, and I've seen that at some resorts we've spoken at where there were actually medical professionals there, and suddenly all the rules went out the window for them for safe sex and common sense and all that. So what seems to happen based on your observation of the dynamics of people when they, so I guess to frame my kind of convoluted question, a couple, let's say that they establish rules for how they're going to do something, and then they go to a situation and they become active in it. And have you seen partners suddenly deviate from those rules and not realize why? And if that is, because I've seen that a lot. And how can you deal with that? Do you have any advice on that? or is my observation a fluke?
There's an old axiom that says that rules are there to be broken, right? The idea that rules are there to be broken. And quite often, although you may agree on a particular set of rules, that the situation may bring about some kind of behaviors which deviate from the rules. I'll give you a basic example, if you don't mind me sort of being graphic about this. That, for instance, couples that agree that, all sex is good, but no anal sex. And then all of a sudden, the woman gets into a situation, before you know, there's anal sex. And the husband is going, what is going on? And she's saying, well, love it. Never thought I would, but whatever situation, how it happened, I enjoyed it. So this will be kind of a situation where the rules are broken. And some people get very upset about rules being broken because they were not spoken beforehand. So your question is, are there situations where rules are broken? Absolutely. Should people look at breaking rules? I would sort of tend to against it. But if the rules are broken, then you have to go back to the drawing board and ask why they were broken and what were the consequences of those rules. Did one person actually enjoy that particular experience, or did they not enjoy that experience? I think I'd mentioned to you that there was a couple I was interviewing, and they said that they always play in separate bedrooms, or, they do not play in front of each other. And she said that because I don't want my husband to be exposed to certain things that I may end up enjoying, and we actually hadn't talked about. So, yeah, those things can happen. And I think that happen quite often.
So as far as for couples, if a couple chooses to have consensual non-monogamy or whatever term you want to use, whether they're swingers in a monogamous relationship or exploring other things in polyamorous relationships, if they've established their rules, what do you suggest for after they've had encounters, like in military, they call it after action review, but at least in the United States, do you have any suggestions on kind of what practical things people can do to hopefully make life less bumpy, with that?
There was a couple that used to run one of the biggest swingers club in Toronto. And this is how they put it. The day after we play, we always go out for breakfast in a public place. And then we talk about what happened during our play, what one person liked, what one person didn't like, if there was any criticisms of each other. And we had it in a public place so we could have a decent conversation. Nobody would get upset with the other person. And this is why they would have it in a public place. So the suggestion is very simple. You must go back to the drawing board and talk about it. For instance, if somebody didn't like something somebody else did, then you try to find out why they didn't like it. What was it? Why were they bothered by it? You've got to discuss things, because if you don't, you're in trouble. Communication is always the key, specifically if you are in a relationship that involves consensual non-monogamy.
I totally agree with you. That's spot on. And 100 times more in this area than I do. So I'm glad that I wasn't off in deep space, because I've seen when I've come, Jamaica in particular, we'll see couples waiting for the airplane returning, and one partner is looking the other way and won't talk to and I'm like, yeah, they had a bad time, whereas others are on fire together still. So it's fascinating. Now, what do you suggest as far as pragmatic things, safety? Because that's one thing, I was in clinical sexology and I've seen every kind of disease that can scare the crap out of you and a few more. Because again, I've seen situations where suddenly when things go wild, even medical people forget common sense. Do you have any suggestions for couples for talking about that? Because particularly in the South where I am, people don't talk about it. It's crazy. Well, to me, it's crazy. Do you have any suggestions for that, as for the people listening, if they're thinking about this beyond the emotional aspect, pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections or diseases? There's a big increase in antibiotic resistant bacterial infections as well. One thing that I always tell people, because a lot of times men won't want to wear condoms, there are other bugs like Mycobacter genitalia, if I'm pronouncing it right, that is not tested for. And the majority of men that are active without condom protection sex are colonized by that bug. And it appears, this hasn't been studied well, it wreaks havoc on the prostate when you get older. And so do you have advice for that on how to bring that topic up?
Well, actually, I did a study on swingers and STDs, and I think the only study that was done. It was done in 2017, and what we found is that the incidence and the prevalence of STDs or STIs, whatever you want to call them, among swingers is very low to start off with. It is. I was surprised it was so low, but it is very low, and I had a large sample size, over 3,000 people. So, now, dealing with particular situations, as you suggest, again, comes down to the rules and the conversations you have within the couple itself. If you agree that regardless of anything, you're always going to use condoms, then you always use condoms. If you agree that you may not use condoms with people then it's up to you to use condoms or not. However, the possibility, if you're having sex with many people, the possibility of developing some kind of STD or STI, it's always there. It's something, like you says, it could be simple ones, meaning in terms of treatment, could be actually pretty easy to treat them. But there's always a consequence associated with any type of STDs that you may acquire somewhere. Also, there's if you're having group sex. Well, if you're picking up something from somebody you with just now, you're going to pass it to somebody else you're going to be with next. So I would always say, be on the safe side, use condoms. Very simple. Guys tend to have a problem, and you talk about the South, and I lived there for over 20 years. I understand very well. A lot of men in the South had a problem with condoms, and I could never figure out why. It takes less than 5 seconds to put it on, man. It's not a problem. So be safe first and not sorry after.
I totally agree. And that's the thing about the so-called automatic behaviors, especially when people are uncomfortable talking about things. The study you referenced for STDs in the lifestyle community being lower, I personally think that's because they're more open and talk about it, and they get testing, whereas people want to ignore it and hope it goes away. And
I think the testing goes a long way, because what I found out is that most people that are, let me use the term, career swingers, they get tested every 6 months. It's become part of their routine per se. So they go and get tested, because it's very simple to get tested. Well, in the United States, and I guess pretty much anywhere else, I imagine, it's a question, if it comes in, it doesn't hurt, and it's something that's done and over with quick, and you get results pretty quick, depending on what type of testing you're doing. If you're doing swabbing or if you're doing blood tests per se, but to safeguard your health, it's worth it.
Yeah, so that is something I wanted to mention for this conversation, because it is a possible risk, as well as pregnancy. So those are two things to consider. Now, this was a huge debate with my original mentor, Dr. McLavena. He, in the 80s, was really promoting a antimicrobial lubricant. Mm-hmm. And there was, ironically, and I probably shouldn't go into too much detail there because it's still a hot topic, there was big pushback that the health institutions were wanting to promote condoms because certain companies found those to be very profitable. But they could make antimicrobial lubricants, and they distributed them in tests in Africa where there were AIDS outbreaks, and it tremendously helped. So I really wish that was available today. Now, the thing you have to watch out with that is you can really disturb the biome in women's vaginal canals with those things. But so there are always pros and cons. But I just wanted to touch on that topic. Well, otherwise, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us, and we'll have to chat more. Does anybody have any questions, or Eddie, do you want to bring up anything that we haven't talked about?
I'm open to questions if there's any.
Okay. I know this is a topic people are oftentimes not comfortable talking about, and I totally understand. But one thing I want to say for everybody attending, thank you for being here, because this is part of, to me, sexual awareness and sexual actualization is part of personal growth. And when you look back on your life, knowing that you've expressed who you are and what you want to be is really, really important. So thank you for being here. And this, I think, will help improve the quality of your relationship, especially if you're not in a relationship yet, to think about yourself honestly and be comfortable talking with your partner. Now, somebody came in with a question, how can you improve your immune system against bacterial infections? Now, if you're asking as far as like Mycobacter genitalium, that is a bug that I'm particularly annoyed with, because that can be easily killed by most antibiotics until it gets into the prostate. I'm not a medical doctor, so no medical advice here. But I'm not a big fan of antibiotics generally either. But that's just an insidious little thing that very few people, it's not tested for. As far as your immune system, good health, getting enough sleep is critical. Again, I'm not giving medical advice here, but for me personally, just good health, regular exercise, a good diet. That diet is real complicated too, because I think it varies from person to person. But just those three things: good health, as far as good sleep, regular exercise, and a good diet will make a huge difference. They're asking vitamin C. Well, I was trained in nutritional biochem in undergrad. And I know enough to know about that, as I say, for neuroscience, that nobody truly knows. The general consensus is if you're deficient for your body in any particular vitamin or micronutrient, macro, it's going to cause you to be weaker. So getting a variety of foods that are nutritious, supplementation may help. There are arguments for and against it, but I usually say eat a highly varied diet with a lot of plants. And if you eat animals, eat meat. That's there are a lot of pros to that. That's a whole nother debate. But yeah, making sure that you have enough vitamins. If you're low on C, if you're low on D, that will impact your immune system. But just I personally try to eat a blended whole organic lemon a day. Or the reason I say organic is because they put a nasty pesticide on the surface of citrus fruit, and I blend the whole thing. So because there are a lot more things in C than people realize that do help your immune system. But I hope that answered it. Don't want to turn this into a nutrition chat, but that will, good sleep, good diet, exercise that's right for you, and reducing your stress. All of that will help. But if you do have an infection, see a doctor and get it treated, if at all possible. Well, otherwise, did anybody else have any questions, or or you can email us. For you, Dr. Fernandes, to contact you, and I can put it in the group chat, and I will put it on the Mind Valley site. You can be reached. Let me make sure it's at Dr. Ziggy1 at. Why don't you say it so I don't mess it up, because I don't have it written down. Is it Dr.
Yes, it's Dr. Ziggy1. Yes.
At Hotmail or?
And no, it's I'm not sure if it's AOL. I can't remember.
Let me.
I can get that for you.
I should have it here.
It's Dr. Ziggy1 at outlook.com.
Outlook.com. Okay, so if anybody would like to email Dr. Fernandes directly, please contact him. And Guys, everybody, I really appreciate you being with us today. And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out in the future. I'm going to take this video and put it up on YouTube tomorrow. The goal is at 11 o'clock East Coast American time tomorrow. And I'll put out a link to that here in the Mind Valley community. If you do watch it on YouTube, please like and subscribe and all that fun stuff that I always forget to say. And keep an eye out for what Dr. Fernandes is doing. And well, thank you too. I really appreciate it, guys. And hopefully we answered your questions. If not, let us know and we can try to clarify stuff and give a better thing. And the last thing to say again is we're not trying to tell you what to do or what to think. We're trying to get you to think and expand your thoughts. Otherwise, unless you have other questions or thoughts, Eddie, I really appreciate you being here. And,
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. Always willing to share. Thank you.
Well, thanks. And I'll touch base with you here in just a few minutes.
Okay.
All right. Bye. Take care.
Take care.